This week's Enemy Sidelines brought to you by Microsoft Teams. Our guest is Jeff Srebiec. He writes for The Athletic up in Baltimore, used to write for the Baltimore Sun, has covered the Baltimore Ravens for many, many years. Jeff, this is the first time I'm actually seeing you face to face. We usually chat via radio. How's it going today? Obviously, the Ravens are an exciting team to cover, but how's everything going for you so far?
It's good. It's good. I mean, this is different. It's everything. Everything about it is different. How you have to cover the team, how you have to approach writing stories. But just speaking for myself, just to be able to watch an actual football game and be in the stadium this past Sunday, it brings back the norm a little bit. I know we're far from the norm quite yet, but it was nice to be able to watch a football game and just to be able to do your job like you want to do it.
Well, obviously, I was at home because the Texans played Thursday night. I got to see a little bit of that Ravens win 38-6 over the Cleveland Browns. I'll get to that in a minute. But first, let's talk about this offseason because we saw what the Ravens were capable of last year. There were a lot of high expectations for them heading into the playoffs. They get the first run bye. Then, obviously, they lose to the Titans. What was the offseason like for Lamar Jackson, for this Ravens team? What was sort of the attitude surrounding the team heading into 2020?
Yeah, that one took a little while for them to get over. I mean, they had passed every test during the regular season. Won the, they were 2-2 at one point. So they won 14 straight games to close the regular season, set all sorts of team and league records in the process. Had waited a long time to win that AFC North and get the bye and the home field playoff game, and they just didn't show up. I mean, they were beaten by a Titans team that was much better that day. Outplayed, outcoached, out physicaled, out pretty much everything, and there's not a lot you can do to make excuses. They just got it taken to them, and they got beat on their home field, and it was a bitter pill to swallow, especially since they patterned themselves as a real physical, set the tone team. And the fact is, the Titans came in and did that to them on their home field. So it was a long couple months, and then obviously we had the quarantine and all that. Lamar Jackson was in Florida, didn't get to throw to his receivers as much as he would have liked. But they came back Sunday and they looked like they were prepared. It looked like a pretty prepared team that did what they were supposed to do in the limited time. And, that's the thing. Texans were talking about that for a while with Deshaun Watson. How long is the window open when you have a quarterback on his rookie deal? And Lamar Jackson's on his rookie deal now, which allows them to keep a pretty deep roster. So I think there's definitely a sense of urgency heading into this year, especially after losing 2 straight playoff games in their home field in back-to-back years.
Well, I remember the MVP chants last year when the Texans were up at M&T Stadium, and this year Lamar Jackson looks just as good as advertised, if not better, heading into year 3. Let's get into this week's Next Gen Stat presented by AWS. Lamar Jackson had the best passer rating of all QBs that played in week 1, 152.1. That's almost a perfect passer rating. He was ahead of Russell Wilson and Gardner Minshew. Both of those quarterbacks also put up big numbers. So let's talk about Lamar Jackson now heading into year 3. After seeing that week 1 performance, I know it's early, but is he better than he was even last year? Are we going to see even more passing from Lamar Jackson than running?
Yeah, well, I think 2 things. One, he called this mostly a mental offseason for himself. He wanted to learn the nuances of the quarterback position better. He wanted to study the Ravens offense, study what defenses were doing to him. He said he watched a ton of film this offseason. He was inside for most of it and really tried to use the time to study his own game and get better at the quarterback position. The athletic tools are going to be there. And I think we saw that Sunday. He just looked very comfortable and confident in everything he did. And now, he was only the second unanimous MVP in league history last year. So it's going to be tough to go up in terms of performance. But if you just look at just how he conducted himself, how he ran the game, he's at his best when he's doing some improvising and running around a little bit, but he was just so in control of everything. And I think that was the biggest takeaway, just the command he had of the offense and everything he's doing. But in your other part of your question is very true. The question still exists with the Ravens. If you stop their running game or if you get an early lead on them, can they beat you? Can they come back? Are they prolific enough in the passing game to come back and win, especially in a big game? And the Titans lost further, it made the skeptics even more confident that they can't. But the Ravens have tried to evolve a little offensively. They want to, throw the ball a little more, challenge teams more downfield. And Lamar Jackson, so far so good. They threw a ton downfield against the Browns, and part of that was because the Browns secondary was kind of depleted. But I think you will see them try to establish the pass more and take more big shots down the field. And that's definitely something they've spent a lot of time in the summer when they got together working on.
Well, a lot of those downfield shots were very much due to the fact that Hollywood Brown was out there on the field. What's the buzz been around surrounding him this offseason? I feel like even I heard down here in Houston about his offseason and all the workouts that he did and how he's healthy again. How does that change what he's able to do this year, what he was able to do in the offseason?
In Baltimore, the quest to have like a young number one type receiver in his prime, it's gone on forever. I mean, they've never really had that guy. Torrey Smith had a good run, but all their receivers have mostly been veteran guys that they've picked up later in their careers, the Steve Smiths and the Anquan Boldens and the Derek Masons. This is a homegrown guy that they really believe in. And I think the biggest key for Marquise Brown was just healthy. I mean, last year, you look at his rookie numbers, pretty good, decent, but he really didn't practice much. He didn't have much of a training camp, and he had a screw in his foot. He was still getting over foot surgery, and he was probably at 50% at best. So when you think of those things and then you look at his numbers, you're like, okay, that's pretty good. But this offseason, he was healthier. I mean, there was times last year where his weight got as low as like 165 to play receiver in the NFL. So he put on more weight and more muscle, and he hasn't really lost any speed. And he had over 100 yards receiving in the first half. Sunday, the Ravens didn't throw the ball a ton after that. But he definitely seems like he could be emerging as the type of number one receiver that they've long tried to develop.
Well, we obviously have seen what Mark Andrews can do. The Texans saw him up close last year. He was 4 for 4, 75 yards, a touchdown, and he delivered in week 1 with 2 touchdowns. What makes that tight end so hard to cover for opposing defenses?
Just, first of all, he's very good hands. I mean, it's the type of situation where Lamar Jackson never feels like he's covered. Even when he does have a guy around him, Jackson feels like his rapport with Andrews and the chemistry he has is good enough where if Jackson gets the ball in a certain place, it's going to be caught. And more often than not, that's been the result. There was a play against the Browns where there's no reason he should have thrown the ball, and yet it was a big third down conversion. They picked up 20-something yards. But the other thing is Andrews just has he doesn't really wow you with his speed and his physicality or any of that. He's just one of these guys that has a really good idea on how to run routes and how to get open and where to be when the quarterback needs him. And Lamar Jackson trusts him implicitly. Andrews is a motivated guy. He talked all off season how he wants to kind of join that group of the Kittles and the Travis Kelce's and become one of the top tight ends in the league. He led all tight ends in touchdowns last year. He already has 2 this year. So I think he's another ascending player that you're going to see as long as he stays healthy, as kind of a perennial Pro Bowl player.
Well, the Texans are going to face Calais Campbell, a guy that they're very familiar with from his days with Jacksonville. A big move for the Ravens this offseason to get him on their defense. How does he make an impact? How does he change things? Obviously, Ravens love to blitz, and they'll get to do that with Calais. But how has he fit in so far with that Ravens defense?
He's fitting great. First of all, from a leadership standpoint, I mean, we're talking about the Walter Payton Man of the Year. So just from a professional class standpoint, during a very difficult offseason, he was a great guy to have around, already become a leader in the room. From a football standpoint, the Ravens' reputation has always been this up-tempo, get after the quarterback defense. But kind of the reality is, like last year, they blitzed more than any team in NFL history because they really couldn't generate a pass rush with their front four, and they haven't had kind of that interior pass rusher that, gets in early. And I'm not talking about edge guy like a Suggs, but I'm talking about that interior guy. And Campbell's obviously that guy. So he should really upgrade, really help him with the pass rush. Got his hands on, I think, 3 balls already in the week 1, and one of them was intercepted. So he's a guy that opposing teams have to deal with, and the Ravens have kind of lacked that interior pass rushing presence.
One thing that the Browns did not struggle with last week in their loss was running the ball. They were able to run the ball 138 yards on the ground. How much of a concern is that for this Ravens defense moving forward?
Well, they better figure it out, because, man, was I impressed with Johnson. I think you have to feel good for him, too, with all the stuff said about that deal and all that. For him to come out and look like that's very impressive. You look very much like he did in Arizona all those years before the injuries. But the Ravens have always prided themselves on stopping the run. Didn't do it at times last year, and they sort of revamped that whole defensive front seven. I mean, there's 4 new starters in there, but 2 of the guys, they're 2 starting inside linebackers, are rookies. So, you're going to get a learning curve there. I mean, those guys are going to give up some plays, miss some assignments. Patrick Queen and Malik Harrison are both talented players, but I think they understand that they're going to make some mistakes, and they're just going to have to play through them. And we saw Harrison bust assignment on one of the, I think it was a 30-yard run by Chubb, and that's going to be, they're going to give up some yards, but they are pretty stout up front. And the Browns also have 2 very good backs, so that there's no shame in giving up some yards to them. But that's something they're going to have to get solidified, because when their defense was vulnerable last year, it was when they were allowing teams to run on them.
Well, that Ravens secondary is something that they're even talking about down here in Houston already here in week 2. How do you foresee them matching up? They forced 3 turnovers last week against the Browns, 2 in the first 2 possessions. But this week they're going to go up against some speedy wideouts and Will Fuller, Kenny Stills, and Brandon Cooks. What do you think of those matchups this week for the Ravens secondary?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a good matchup. And, the Ravens, unlike other teams, Matthew Judon's on the franchise tag, but the Ravens have spent a lot of assets on building that secondary. Marcus Peters they traded for and then paid. Obviously, we all know what happened to Earl Thomas. That kind of went belly up. The other safety they've extended. Marlon Humphrey's a first-round pick who's about to get paid. So they kind of built that defense from the back to the front. And they like that. They like, their options in any matchup. I mean, they have 4 cornerbacks who they feel comfortable marking the other team's top receiver. I'd throw Tavon Young, who's their slot guy, and Jimmy Smith, who's been their longtime number 1 corner, is now their number 4. I'd throw those 2 in the mix too. So, with the speed the Texans have, and, I love Deshaun Watson. When he played in Baltimore last year, I hadn't seen him struggle too much like that. So I think they realize that there's no way that's going to happen another time against them. So they're definitely going to have to be sharp and know their assignments and make sure those guys don't get behind them, because their safety group is pretty young and inexperienced. Browns didn't really take any shots deep, which surprised me. I don't think the Texans will make that same mistake. I think they'll try to challenge the Ravens' young safeties. All
right, Jeff, what storylines are you working on for the Ravens this week?
Well, one is, it's interesting with the kind of the parallels. The Texans signed Deshaun Watson to a long-term deal. They signed Laramie Tunsil not too long ago to a long-term deal. They have a couple other really, quality veterans that they've locked up. And the Ravens are sort of going to have to, follow suit with similar things. Obviously, Lamar Jackson's going to get paid, and it's going to be pretty soon. Their left tackle, Ronnie Stanley, is another guy who's going to, may challenge Tunsil's the highest paid tackle in the league. So I was going to look a little bit at, how they're going to have to follow in the Texans' footsteps a little bit, and how the Texans have managed these contracts and prioritize keeping some guys. And that's sort of interesting. And another thing is, just given with the Texans, some of the Texans' strengths, obviously you can't talk with them without J.J. Watt. The Ravens struggled a little on their offensive line, and they expected that. You have a rookie starting at right guard who played tackle in college, and his first game in the NFL, he's not only starting, he's playing a different position. That's a question mark. Their center tore his ACL, MCL, and PCL 9.5 months ago, and yet he's starting already. So he's not back to full strength. So I think that's something I'd have to look at this week to see how they're going to deal with the Texans front, and specifically Watt, judging, with the question marks they do have along the interior of their own offensive line.
Well, we're looking forward to it. The home opener for the Houston Texans, 3:25 kickoff on Sunday against the Baltimore Ravens. Jeff Srebiec, always a pleasure chatting with you. Thanks so much, and we'll talk soon.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me.